What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? Story 1. I used to work for a super bitchy manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, bad-talking us, to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old one comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much the store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are going to make you." When the old manager didn't move, the new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The old manager is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. Story 2, well, this might be a long one. I grew up around a mother with dissociative disorder as well as narcissism. She was addicted to opiates as far back as I can remember and would do anything to get them, and I mean anything. Growing up, it wasn't rare for her to have a tantrum during one of her highs and beat the shit out of me, break me down by picking apart every little thing she knew I was afraid or self-conscious of, and actively sabotage my relationship with my father and siblings. She would be up for days at a time, pass out standing up with her eyes glazed over and back hunched, and when she festered once again, start moving and otherwise destroying everything in the house. There were times where I'd leave and the house would be clean and come home and it would look as though a pissed-off tornado had run through the house that is broken glass, animal feces, dirty clothes, roaches, empty pill bottles, ground-up pill residue, and other miscellaneous things littering the house. On particularly bad nights, she would hallucinate. And during those times, it wouldn't be uncommon to find pools of her blood on the ground from running through glass. I remember being up for days at a time because her and my father would scream at each other for days at a time without stopping, actively trying to get me to pick one side or the other, even if it meant barging into my room at 4 a.m. to begin their screaming match where I could watch. She manipulated me, abandoned me at times in the middle of nowhere when she'd meet up with her various sugar daddies. She was still with my dad during this, and never once apologized during her brief moments of mental clarity. If anything, she would blame everything but herself. In her mind, she was infallible. Money was always a big issue since she couldn't work in such a state. She sold some of her pills, yes, but ultimately those funds were used to buy more drugs anyway. Because of this, we were homeless frequently, without power and water for literally years at a time, and barely ever had any food. It was almost every night I went to sleep with the only thing I'd have eaten that day being a school lunch. On weekends, sometimes I didn't eat at all. The rest of my family had no clue this was happening. During the summer when I was 16, my aunt, whom I hadn't talked much with since I was a lot younger, got in touch. She asked if I'd like to come to stay with them in Texas for a few weeks during the summer. Of course, I said yes. And I was absolutely ecstatic. I didn't bother asking my parents, since I'd be very much surprised if they even noticed I was gone, so they were unaware. My aunt drove up all the way to Iowa and stayed the afternoon with us. My parents seemed to lack the cognition to recognize she was even there out of the blue, so they didn't come out of their room. As I stated before would happen frequently, when she arrived our house was fairly clean. We left for a bit to go get food, and when we returned, the tornado had already passed. As she told me when we were on our way to Texas, the thing that bothered her the most wasn't that our house had suddenly gone to hell, it was that I didn't even react to it. Instead, I tiptoed around the debris and started packing my things without a word. This deeply unsettled her, and ultimately she asked me if I was safe where I lived. I said yes, as it was all I had ever known. She told me that what she saw frightened her, and she wanted me to come live with her in Texas. Thinking that she was joking, I brushed it off. After a few days down there, though, I knew I had to do it. They showed me love, compassion, and care that I'd never even known existed prior to this, and it shook me to my core. So we decided I was going to get emancipated from my parents and move in with them. Ultimately, this involved sitting in a courthouse across from my parents and their lawyer. The judge asked why I wanted to leave, and I explained the above. I expressed the love and compassion I'd experienced for the first time in my life, and that I wanted to, for once, live in peace. Their lawyer rebutted, "To me, it seems as though you have no respect for your parents. Is it because of their financial situation? It looks as though you're attached to the perks of living in a family that makes a reasonable amount of money, and not that you want to leave because they're unfit parents." My mother and father joined in, hooting and hollering actively, trying to break me down as they have so many times before. I let him speak. I let them speak, and I held my tongue until it was my turn. They tried to goad me on, tried to break me, as they had so many times before, but I wouldn't let them. Finally, the judge asked me to speak. With as level a stare as I could muster, I looked at Mother, my father, and their lawyer across from me and said, "If you're asking me if I have no respect for my parents, then you are correct. However, to say it's simply financially motivated is incorrect. I no longer have respect for them because they have." As I was nearly finished, my mother, as she had so many times in the past, began to squirm and scream at me from across the table. "He's lying," until the judge slammed his gavel down and cut the room. My mother staring up at him in complete and utter disbelief. I looked at her, keeping the tears I knew were right behind the corner at bay, and said, "For once in your life, for once in my life, behave as an adult. You can't stop me by simply yelling over me anymore. You have nothing to hold over me now. You can do nothing." As I spoke, the judge motioned to his officer, who moved towards my mother, her expression still frozen in complete bewilderment, as the officer aggressively told her to get up out of her chair and escorted her out of the room. The judge looked at me, my aunt, and my father, and his lawyer with one sweeping glance, and then spoke. "I am sorry that you have had to deal with this for such a long time, young man. There's nothing more that you or anyone else needs to say. You deserve to live a normal life as a normal kid. And it's obvious to me now that your parents are unfit to produce that kind of environment. You will go back to Texas with your aunt, and we will regularly have our social workers in touch to check in on how you are doing. Make the most of this second chance. Good luck, young man." Adjourned. Though the bang of his gavel was the only noise that permeated the room, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My father and his lawyer were escorted out of the room, and the tears I had held back all this time came gushing out like a tidal wave. It's been 7 years since that day, and I am happy to say that I've managed to grow up and become a well-adjusted adult. I have a great career, great friends, and an amazing girlfriend. I've been in therapy ever since we got back to Texas, and I no longer have trouble sleeping or terrible bouts of anxiety and depression as I used to. Life is good. Story 3. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a lien on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding and I'd have to pay him all of this money, la-di-da. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at the ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. Story 4. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema, as a temporary thing while I figured out what the fuck I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened, around 5 years, who was a very bad person and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water, and she marched up to me going, "We don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know." To which I calmly responded that I was thirsty and needed a drink of water. And if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water, then good luck. But I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored because not my problem, but internally I was put out about it because it was totally fucking pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in, I get promoted to supervisor as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time. But she also gets promoted to floor manager. So she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me and everyone else. 4 weeks after that, I got another promotion to floor manager, and at this point we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go saccharine sweet. "Oh, thanks. That's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me because you've been here 5 years and I've only been here 6 weeks. She was shocked. It was delightful. Story 5. My ex and I were moving out after a breakup, cleaning out the garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a coworker until I could find a better place to live, as most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. I collected myself and said, "Because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do, ever again." It was a really great feeling because I literally thought of the "you have no power here" as I laughed. Story 6. Not me, but a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grandmother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school, my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He's a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 a.m. and then he'd be off to work until around 10 p.m. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he'd lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face, and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. Story 10. I had a short stint as a private investigator who specialized in providing investigative services to public defenders. We had this one county that was notorious for a sheriff's department that would make BS traffic stops as a pretext to search vehicles. One deputy in particular came up time and time again for this kind of thing. I was asked to interview this deputy for a defense attorney. Deputy had some of the worst report writing skills I've ever seen, riddled with grammar and spelling errors. Quite often, a deputy wouldn't even include the reason he pulls people over in his reports. So I went to interview the guy. As a part of the process, there's a senior sheriff's rep there that basically is supposed to protect deputies from people like me and keep them from saying things they shouldn't. We sit down and I pull out his report he wrote on the stop he made on my client's defendant. I've already marked it up, English teacher style with a red pen, and started with, I had some trouble understanding your report. I proceeded to go error by error for the purpose of clarifying the report. He's getting redder and redder. I then go into trying to determine why he pulled over the defendant because it's unclear in the report. He's not able to give a definitive response. All the while, the sheriff's rep, whom I've worked with a lot, and who I have seen being very vocal protecting deputies in interviews like this in the past, is silent. Ultimately, charges against the client were dropped. Months later, I'm driving through the area on the way home from camping, not speeding or breaking any traffic laws. I got pulled over by a deputy. It's the same deputy. He recognizes me immediately, stammers, and manages to say, it's almost dusk. Turn on your headlights. He gets back in his vehicle and takes off before I've even started my engine. Story 11. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other. Over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that, and it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house. And if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologies tasted so sweet, as did the coffee. Story 12. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp, "Do not copy," on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. Story 13. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night, while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter, and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night, as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets, though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn.